quarter one of this year, a conference between major Australian companies and the media discussed the impact of inflation on business. In this conference, analysts stated that inflation increased by 800%. Official statements from the top 4 banks say current trends indicate hyperinflation. In this video, I'll be discussing how inflation impacts Australian business and the likelihood of significant price increases this year. The term inflation plays a huge role in our everyday lives. Inflation occurs when an economy is experiencing an increase in the level of prices of goods and services for everyday household items. Hyperinflation is when price levels for goods and services surge out of control and currencies begin to lose value almost completely. An example of hyperinflation was in 2008, when Zimbabwe hit 79,600,000,000% monthly inflation. A $100 million bill had to be introduced, which was only equivalent to $50 US. Stores in the country eventually began using US dollars while refusing their own country's currency. In terms of inflation here in Australia, some companies have resorted to stealth shrinkflation to deal with recent inflationary pressure. This is when they reduce the size or volume of a product, but keep the same price level. A recent example of this is Costco, which has been in the news recently, allegedly covering a 15% rise in inflation by selling paper towels with 20 fewer sheets than before for the same price. But shrinkflation is not always a viable solution to inflation, and an alternative action which many businesses are now taking is regular and substantial price increases. Consumer giants such as Kimberly-Clark and Hershey have been in the press recently, among others, because they have already announced that they have taken major price rise increases in quarter 1 and quarter 2 of this year, implementing mid to high single-digit increases across a majority of their product lines. Taking a look at what this means for the Australian business community as a whole, we need only take a look back to see what generally happens when businesses increase prices. Historically, the trend is once prices of commodities are brought up, they don't tend to come back down. And as input costs continue to soar as expected, most companies will have to decide whether or not to increase prices. From an economic standpoint, if the economy does hit hyperinflation, the only way to resolve it is through drastic measures called shock therapy, which include slashing government expenditures, increasing interest rates, or altering the currency basis. The chairman of the Federal Reserve says the current inflationary environment is merely transitory, but banks are starting to speculate otherwise, with one Australian bank increasing interest rates already. Over the next few months then, price rises are likely to be a major topic of discussion. It's also likely that more companies are going to be increasing prices to survive or else collapse into bankruptcy. From an everyday consumer perspective, it's also likely that the average amount of money consumers spend on everyday items will go up to levels we haven't seen before in Australia. What is clear then is that businesses need to think very carefully about any price action they decide to take in the market to combat inflation.